You know, sometimes I feel like such a negative Nick, especially regarding my recent critiques. As much as I want to find joy in things, that can be a challenge given the world's woes. However, I'd like to take a break from all that doom and gloom for a change. Though given what I'll be talking about, I probably shouldn't be this kind. But anyways, today I'll be defending a middle-of-the-road 2000 CGI show that holds a special place in my heart, which remains both forgotten and poorly received. Before I begin the review proper, I shall preface this by saying that you should not view this video as an objective analysis on the show as a whole. Most of what will be said here boils down to personal opinion, and I recommend you watch the show for yourself before forming a judgment based off of my words. Try to keep an open mind if you feel like giving it a watch as well. But that's enough disclaimers. Let's just start the review. So, for any viewers that haven't paid attention to my online presence for the past 4 years, I've routinely referenced this quirky little 3D cartoon called Pet Alien, often mentioning my continued praise of the almighty green alien. It's become synonymous with my persona ever since, almost like a signature to my brand. While a lot of my gushing is rooted in irony, there is some deep sincerity to some of my appreciation for this show and what it means to me. It's admittedly become overshadowed in my mind as of late, but it's still left a notable impact. Now let's take a trip to the Conformer dimension and find out what I find so special about it. You want to know something that surprised me? The fact that there's lore to this series prior to this cartoon's creation. Information is unsurprisingly spotty on the matter, but presumably in the early to mid-90s. The creator Jeff Muncy thought to create a line of stuffed alien plushes under the branding Pet Alien. The concept originally started with just keychains and plushies distributed by the Best Ever company, but would later evolve into somewhat of a story by the late 90s and early 2000s at the request of his sales reps. Muncy self-published a book under the branding, subtitled The Most Special Place, and around the same time, a dot-com bubble-era website was made to promote the brand, complete with a storefront. Because let's face it, what's the point of living if you don't have Dinko merch at the ready? The brand's direction made it clear that he was the main alien of the lot. I mean, look at him. He's primed for marketability. The website also hosted a trilogy of cartoon flash shorts with him in the spotlight, among 3 other alien pals. These were done around the year 2000 by Muncy under his John Doe Studios label, and animated by Flinch Studio, operating today as Mighty Pants Media. As their slogan says, ideas are born naked. Yeah, sure they are. That's why you gotta put pants on them. Alas, it seems that the second of these shorts wasn't recoverable through the Wayback Machine. Fortunately, I was able to actually find a snippet of it on Flinch's old website, complete with stages of production. That's frickin' awesome. In its origins, Muncy clearly intended for this property to appeal to really young children, and I'll give him credit. It succeeds in that aspect, even if it slightly detracts enjoyment with age at times. Basic rhyme structure and all.
But the first thing he saw as he climbed from the thing was a four-legged alien clenching the wing.
At least it's not insulting its audience. We're a ways off from the Elsa Gate and Cocomelon phenomenons. For what it's worth, I think these shorts have some charm. Either for me it's nostalgia for old school Flash animation, or seeing the roots of a show I loved growing up. Plus a lot of elements, especially its characters, would remain intact in the proper series. Though this still remains as prototypical as you can even get. And I do not think the actual show has any instances of Italians throwing pizza at people, which is unfortunate. This now brings us closer to the show itself. By the early 2000s, Muncy looks to have wanted to bring the concept to a television series with a slightly older audience in mind. Judging by how scarce surviving info related to its early days are, chances are past merch barely took off. Might have just been that it was forgettable and generic to the masses, or didn't have much luck with distribution outside of select areas. Though by the year 2002, production began on a slapstick-heavy, Tex Avery-inspired CGI cartoon. The idea was originally going to get picked up by Disney, yes really, but that was fortunately avoided and would soon be handled by the independent animation distributor and studio Mike Young Productions, known today as Splash Entertainment. Yes, the same company responsible for Alpha and Omega and Norm of the North. And also the hit Scholastic series,
Horrible Histories.
The show was also among the first to be distributed through their new Taffy Entertainment division. According to Muncy, Mike allowed for more creativity and a better vision for his show, unlike Disney, who apparently only had toddlers in mind. Given their business practices, it checks out that they wanted to sanitize it, though admittedly in this case it probably wouldn't have been that out of left field, given the bedtime story feel of the Flash shorts. Alongside Mike Young and their future owner, French studio Moonscoop, India-based Crest Animation and Telegale from Ireland would also be involved, with Crest handling most of the animation for the first season. Europool out of Germany would also assist in the production for Season 2. So yeah, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen for this one, but I guess you need all the help you can get. Much of these companies assisted in other Mike Young projects of the era, such as Code Lyoko, Todd World, and Jaker's The Adventures of Piggly-Winks, and would remain close partners for many years to come. After a short test run in various foreign markets beginning in late 2004, the show would later air in North America on January 23, 2005 on Cartoon Network. Supposedly, it would be the first CN show to share a launch globally, airing across all their markets. Despite some decent ratings initially, the show wouldn't air the first season in its entirety in the US at least, ending its run on May 26 that same year. The show, however, did fare better over in Europe, and by the end of 2005, a second season was greenlit. American cable subscribers could still get the show through the Kabillion On Demand network by around late 2006 or early 2007. Since the second season was never broadcast in the US initially, the timeline for when the show ends has conflicting information. Some sites like Wikipedia say that all of Season 2 was aired later on in 2005, concurrently with the first season, which is conflicted by various articles and copyright info in the credits. Another source I saw claimed that the last episode aired as late as early 2011, also in conflict with the show's credits. Presumably this might have to do with the show entering digital distribution. The show would eventually return to television though by 2017 through Ion's Cubo network, and aside from a year-long removal in 2019, would continue to air until the channel's demise. So while there isn't a concrete answer as to when the show actually ended, I'm pretty sure that production of the show wrapped up in early 2007. Since then, the series has been largely abandoned. Even Splash Entertainment themselves didn't seem to care much for it, as it would rarely show on Kabillion On Demand after its first few months, being relegated exclusively to their website by the second half of the year. Though this would not mark the end of Munsey's stint in television production. In 2008, he would create the Pajanimals series for the Jim Henson Company and 4Kids. This was something tailored for a toddler audience during overnights on the PBS Sprout network, and feels more like what he was doing prior to his Pet Alien brand, just with bedtime puppets. While it did better over here than his previous work, that has also been buried under the bed and somewhat forgotten. Since then, Jeff Smigley stuck to his interests as a toy creator and a pajama designer. But I've gone long enough with this history lesson. It's time we look at the alien companions for real. The show follows the life of young teenager Tommy Cadle, whose life is turned upside down after a cast of 5 aliens crash into his lighthouse during the night. Despite whatever trouble they all seem to cause, Tommy is content with having them around as they brighten up his mundane life. This pleases the aliens, especially since most of them would prefer to stay. As such, the episodes revolve around the antics Tommy has to endure from his alien guests and the world around him. Okay, so maybe calling them pets would be a huge stretch. Only one of them fits snugly into that category. But hey, the series wasn't originally designed with that aspect in mind, so I can look past it. Personally, I really like the concept, even if it's somewhat generic and cliche. It gives a lot of opportunities for humorous episodes and builds chemistry between Tommy and the aliens in a way that feels believable. While it would be cool to have it be just the aliens given they serve well on their own, we kind of already have a show that fills that void.
Come back, little fly. You're gonna miss Bongo Beach Bay Bonanza in HD.
Despite there being 5 main aliens, only 3 of which appear to serve a major purpose through most episodes. First, there's Gumpers, the big, pink, gluttonous coward who doesn't know his own strength. He's also got a sentient sweet tooth apparently, kinda neat. He's also the one with the funniest lines in my opinion, and the source for much of the fart and burp humor.
Sorry.
Then there's Swanky, built like a Tumblr sexy man, who is the most egotistical and lazy of the group. He's also the one that's most disinterested in everybody else, and wants Tommy's room all to himself. Even though he's basically the jerk and the bot monkey of the aliens, he is probably the most interesting of the bunch throughout the series, and possibly even the strongest, and is among my favorites. And lastly, there's Dinko, the one I've drawn too much. He's basically the brains of the group and considers himself Tommy's best friend. He's the one most mesmerized by the ways of planet Earth, and is naturally the most eager and curious of them all. But although he's the most innocent and friendly, he is the one who causes the most trouble for Tommy. He's also the one I love most because of course he is. I'll elaborate on why when I get more in depth. The other 2 aliens are more or less minor characters. Flip is a hyperactive bird-like alien who is often used for comedic relief in Slapstick. He's a welcome presence that would have been far worse if he was a dominant character. And finally we have Scruffy, the least interesting and most underutilized of the whole crew. He's apparently Dinko's pet dog though, and has a tongue with a mind of its own. Sadly, if there was any alien that had to be cut, it'd be him. His role in the series is almost non-existent outside of a few gags, unlike Flip, who at least has a better purpose within the show. I wouldn't call him bad, but there's very little to him besides being a a weird dog. And truthfully, I've seen weirder dogs who actually were dogs and not similar alien creatures. As for the humans, Tommy also unfortunately falls under this curse of being uninteresting. He seems to barely have a personality, and most of his spark comes from the things around him rather than on his own. Once again, not necessarily bad, but really should have been fleshed out better. Though with the wild directions this show goes in, I suppose a simple straight man as the lead worked out well enough. At least he's a likable protagonist and is seldom annoying, just kinda bland. And honestly, he's probably the best of the humans in this show. Robin Cadle is Tommy's nagging mother, who communicates to her son through PA speakers in his lighthouse. PA probably not meaning pet alien. Fortunately, she isn't all too intrusive and seems to have been left at the wayside in later episodes. She doesn't appear in more than half of the episodes I've seen, probably showing that the role was scrapped partway into production or that her appearance is very sporadic. Season 2 appears to lack her altogether. I haven't seen every episode though, so please correct me on this. Other characters include Melba Manners, the bratty girl next door who often shouts Tommy's name whenever something goes wrong, often from no fault of his own. She's unlikable, and that's kind of the point, though I'd imagine many viewers will dread her screen time. There's also Gabby, who's super obsessed with Tommy and wants him to love her, essentially a stalker and a nuisance. Granville Desprez is also like this with Melba, though with even less success. Otherwise, he's another pompous weirdo and very British, even though he's always mistaken as Norwegian.
No one makes my friend Tommy move in with the Norwegian boy!
His only friends are also statues he owns, which considering he's a descendant of the town's founders feels like a huge step backwards. Guess they no longer hold the keys to the city. He's also the one who always ends up being the butt of jokes and scenes he's in, often humiliating himself. It can get overbearing to say the least, especially when we already have Swanky in a similar role who's more deserving of it. The last noteworthy one is Captain Spangley, a crazy old guy who runs a taffy shop Tommy frequently visits and sometimes works at. His experience as a captain was a traumatic one though, as he apparently fears water. Overall, he's a fine character to have around, even if you could argue he's a less greedy derivative of Mr. Krabs in a lot of ways. There's a few other minor recurring characters throughout the series, both aliens and humans, but they aren't worth analyzing for the time being. This admittedly doesn't paint the best picture for the show if I've negatively described a good few of the characters, especially so with the non-aliens, almost like it'd be better if they weren't there. But I guess that goes to show you how much of a mess Tommy's life really is, and the aliens serve as both a blessing and a curse in this regard. And if the show handles them well, I guess I can look past those flaws. How about we talk about the other major elements? I've got lots more to say about those. First, there's the setting. The show takes place almost exclusively in the small seaside town of Desprez Bay. On rare occasions, outer space is also traversed, usually through dreams though. This is a cozy setting, even with all the madness that occurs, though it isn't exactly memorable other than its quirky name. And beyond the saltwater taffy business and pesky crabs and seagulls, its setting doesn't hold much relevance to the show's themes. Not that it really needs to, just an observation. It's a setting that could have been spruced up a bit so it had more identity. Now let's start with the structure. The chaotic nature of things does wonders for such a comedy-centric show, though it keeps steady control so it's not too draining. As a result, the show goes with simple plots to maximize its comedic potential, as it should. While the humor is admittedly hit or miss, and has a few too many toilet jokes for my liking, especially out of Gumpers, it still provides a good supply of laughs. Much of the humor is through dialogue, and I love me some of that. The dumber the script, the better. Well, I wouldn't exactly call the scripts all dumb, sometimes they just mess with your brain. The writing style is one that embraced a high level of absurd comedy. Understandably, it's not everyone's thing, so your tolerance for it dictates how much mileage this show will give you. While it's mostly positive for me, there are times where it can get grating, especially in specific episodes, but that usually depends on what my mood is. While a bulk of its humor is reliant on corny lines and delivery, there's also loads of visual gags which spice things up. I'll talk more about that when I discuss the show's animation. Trust me, it'll be worth it. The show doesn't always fade into being mindless comedy, even if that's what it primarily is. The writing does leave room for the occasional instances of world building and a few more serious moments. At times the show can get mildly emotional, yet still remain comedic in the process. There's even hints of subtle continuity across the series, particularly with select side characters like the Mad Dr. Daffodil. And besides a few pacing issues, the writing remains solid for such a mindless cartoon, even if a bit of a roller coaster in its early episodes. Nothing essential, though it serves good at being comfort media in the right places. But whatever, you can have a show with good jokes, but if your delivery falls flat, then the jokes fail with them. Thankfully, the show has that element in the safe zone. That's honestly impressive considering the show only utilizes 4 voice actors. This is a common cost-cutting measure for shows produced on a low budget. More actors means more people to pay, so studios will often limit the cast to have at most 4 or 5 available. And in this case, the choices you make in casting are even more crucial than usual. One wrong move can soon hurt the quality by a huge amount. While I may not exactly be the best to judge quality of talent, to me nearly each choice made sense for their roles. Here's a fun fact: this is the first show to feature Charles Schlatter as the lead character, and honestly, it really shows in the first season. While a good actor with decent range, he wasn't quite up to par with the others. But that's probably expected since he's more of a typical actor, less experienced with voice talent. Just about all his voice acting gigs before this were for insignificant roles in cartoons. Also, given he plays the role of a 12 to 13-year-old, his voice does sound way deeper than it probably should be. Funny story, I once thought that Fanboy's voice actor also played the role of Tommy around 2010 or so.
It's no use, Chum Chum. I'm just not a studier. I think I get that from my grandpa.
As a member of the official Brotherhood of the Protectors of Tinytopia, I hereby vow to guard this little city from all shakers.
Honestly, it's probably better he stuck with such a voice. It doesn't grate on the ears most of the time. Didn't fall into that female actor voicing a boy cliche either. With that flaw aside, I feel this sets a high bar for the voice talent if he's the only sorta weak one. To his credit, Schlatter did settle into his roles far better by the second season, and years later would play another lead role as Kick Buttowski. He was also the voice of Ace Bunny from Lunatics later in the year, but it's best we ignore that. I like to imagine that this show was a learning experience for him in character acting. Voice direction was handled by the famed Jess Harnell, most famous for voicing Wacko Warner on Animaniacs and Crash Bandicoot, among numerous other icons. He would land the roles for the characters Gumpers, Swanky, and Granville. The last one can be somewhat annoying, but the others feel like they have the perfect voice. Jess's tenor goes excellently with those two characters, especially so with Swanky, who also has a stellar singing voice.
I've got the spray bay on a string, that string around my antenna.
Gumpers also has a good balance between his dumb yet tough sounding vocality that meshes perfectly with his personality. A great delivery and performance overall. Candy Milo is the only actress on Boyd. Candy Milo is the only actress on board, and voices all the female characters in the show. I don't exactly love her performance here, but her range makes up for it, proving a good choice. If I had to pick a favorite of her roles here, it'd probably be Gabby. Though my personal favorite of the actors featured here is the legend himself, Charlie Adler, responsible for the greatest role in all of cartoon history.
Proper dental hygiene starts at home.
That role was so golden it made it into 2 shows. But pointless trivia aside, Adler is one of my personal favorite voice actors, who's done many amazing voices over the years. And I have no shame in admitting that this show is a factor in why. His roles as Captain Spangly and Flip are just serviceable enough, I admit. Spangly's quick ramblings can provide a chuckle here and there, and the same goes for Flip's incoherent babbling, though it isn't exceptional. As Dinko though, he brings his A-game. I wouldn't call it his best role, hell I can't even call it definitive for him either. At times his voice does come real close to his previous role as Candy from Space Goofs, coincidentally another green alien that I absolutely adore.
Oh, my beautiful living room! I'm feeling weak. I think I'm dying. I failed, Tommy of Earth! Failed!
And honestly, I'd say that his role as Candy edges slightly above Dinko's, but even then I still associate that kind of voice with the latter. Disregarding any similarities between the two, at least he sells the character nicely and the delivery matches his quasi-sophisticated speech. I guess if there's one issue I do have with the voice cast, Harnell and Adler's voices can blend together at times, mainly in their lower ranges. Could definitely benefit from extra talent, but I'm guessing that wasn't covered in the budget. As for the rest of the sound elements in the show, they're mostly just average but definitely has its faults. Sometimes the sound effects can be overkill, especially so in early episodes when they were going above and beyond with the crazy factor. Music on the other hand fares better and matches the crazy vibe. It kinda has a quirky 60s B-movie sci-fi feel to it with a mix of laid-back and frantic tunes of varying genres thrown in, which complement the setting and tone of scenes. Alas, it's largely inessential and forgettable. Speaking of music, this show apparently has 2 theme songs for its respective seasons. The first is a cheesy sci-fi filtered take on the classical piece Flight of the Bumblebee. As an intro song, it's not exactly a well-executed opener and sounds too dissonant for its own good. Kind of sounds like a less obnoxious version of the Brothers Love theme. If nothing else, it sets the tone for the show's zany nature. Fortunately, improvement was made with the second season, featuring an energetic big band jazz number that actually kinda slaps. This one even has lyrics, but I wouldn't exactly call them good lines.
There's Dinko, Thomas ran to the end. Gumpers has the strength of 10 men. Swanky with his nose in the air. Scruffy and Flip, a crazy wild pair on Earth. Alien.
It doesn't even do a good job at describing the aliens, despite all of them being name-dropped. It manages to be even cheesier than the first seasons as a result. Crap lyrics aside, this theme is pretty catchy and works well even out of context. For as much as I focus on its other major factors, there's an alien elephant in the room that simply can't be ignored. The animation and visuals. Its most distinct characteristic for better or worse. Remember, Muncie envisioned this show as a CGI translation of classic slapstick animation, done on a supposedly low budget in the mid-2000s. Add onto it a bunch of extra production help from a melting pot of studios, and it raises serious doubts and concerns if this could actually work. It would already be difficult to try and make this sort of production even with a decent budget. No doubt plenty of corners were cut along the way across its entire run. From the aforementioned minimal casting, subpar quality models and textures, reuse of assets, set pieces and animation, and overall rushed feel of some episodes. Not helped by some poorly shot camera angles which have the characters too close or show off the ugliest parts of the visuals. If anything, trying to nail down the style of animation was a massive hurdle in its development, further emphasized by the fact that the first batch of episodes were animated and rendered inconsistently. Originally, the lighting and bloom effects were more dynamic, but character animations were real stiff and awkward. It was an awful look for the show moving forward, since it brought it deep into the uncanny valley. Dinko looks particularly bad with how they positioned his teeth. Yikes! Though as time went on, the animation did get more polished, and the extra lighting effects were toned down. The latter might be at the cost of keeping the budget stable, but I honestly think it looks better this way. The colors are still lush and vibrant, and it looks considerably less rough and grimy. Of course, even with these improvements, this is still a CGI show made for television from that era. This was not going to age gracefully because the technology improves year after year. Some may even say that it was in the wrong time and they should have waited a few more years. Either go all in on that style, or don't go through the trouble of trying and failing. That said, I have to give props to the crew behind such an ambitious project. It looks like they tried their very best to nail down the style given the limitations, and I say they succeeded in their vision. I'm honestly a fan of this aesthetic and think the animation at times can be really good, especially in Season 2. In rare moments, the fluidity and elasticity can almost be exceptional for television standards. Screenshots and renders don't do the cartoon justice. It's best to experience in motion. I'm also impressed by the expressive range of much of the main characters. It does have its freaky and unsettling moments not helped by its age, but for its time it was definitely one of the most flexible on television. The storyboards for this must have been a lot of fun to make. This show really feels like it has a style of its own, unlike much of the other CGI cartoons which aired concurrently with it. The closest thing I can compare it to are those cartoonish video game mascot platformers of the PS2 and GameCube era. You know, Cal the Kangaroo, Skate with a Shapeshifting Chameleon, perhaps even Crash Bandicoot, Super Mario Sunshine, or Rayman. Oh, and since I mentioned the limbless weirdo, he would also receive a short-lived animated series in the year 1999 that I too consider impressive. With the amount of French influence Pet Alien has in common with Rayman, that might be one of its closest parallels. The visual style screams Euro, especially French, very at odds with the appeals of general American audiences. It ain't up to Zillium quality, obviously, though it's full of charm and identity. Some still might say that the show would work better in 2D, but honestly, I don't think that would have helped given the budget. Not to mention, Muncie was more versed in 3D modeling and design, so going in that route was a no-brainer given his experience. The staff did make a bold attempt to adopt the 2D philosophy into much of its production, and as I've said, they succeeded even with the tight budget. If nothing else, the backgrounds were hand-painted and looked great in their own right. And regardless of what you think of its execution, this was leagues better than much of Mike Young's prior CGI output. Sure, they weren't gonna match something like Jimmy Neutron or theatrical animation, but it's a huge leap. But Ugly Martians was only 3 years old by the time of the surface, and that show looked uglier than much of the 90s CG on television. This, along with Code Lyoko, really helped the studio take a huge step forward in the computer animated market. Plus, it possibly paved the way for more expressive 3D television cartoons in the years following. Fanboy and Chum Chum probably wouldn't exist without this show's groundwork. Take that for what you will. As a matter of fact, its creator Eric Robles even assisted in character design and props for Pet Alien. This may indicate how intrinsic this show might have been for him in the CGI medium. But if I'm being honest, I still prefer the funny Alien show's handling of the concept. Fanboy and Chum Chum can get too obnoxious and worn out by comparison. Plus, I'm not as into its art style. Feels more Butch Hartman-esque than anything. Yeah, it's strange, but I find this to look more charming than most of its successors. Shit, it seems like even today that studios have trouble with stylized 3D. When the new Rugrats has designs that look more uncanny than a show from over 15 years ago, you royally screwed up. You could also say this was a divisive nature of modern Pixar films struggling with their own aesthetics. Turning Red 9/11 movie looks worse than Pet Alien. Fucking bite me. That's besides the point though. Overall, I wouldn't call the animation or models great or anything by today's standards, nor were they that great back then. However, I think time has been a little too unforgiving of its ugly aspects. The style is an acquired taste, and it's real hard to come around enjoying it if you weren't around during its tenure. Generally, I think the animation's mostly alright and hasn't aged as poorly as you might think, though I realize I may come off as a little too defensive towards it. I wouldn't call it a masterpiece in that regard. I crave for a new show of this mold with an up-to-date take on the style though. That'd be amazing!
Ici, c'est pas mon
monstre. Je suis juste Kailou.
Okay, one that's actually available in English. Whew, man, remind me to bookmark that show for a future review. It's some good shit. With all my main points basically done with, it's about time I give my thoughts on various episodes of the series. Full disclosure though, my views on these episodes often change upon reflection. Sometimes episodes I liked initially don't hit right afterwards, and others may grow on me. What you see is what you get, and it doesn't go far beyond that. I might as well start by naming a few episodes that I personally didn't like, either due to a lack of good jokes, or other things which happened to bug me. As a little tangent here, I should mention that the show's episode titles can be really easy to mix up. A lot of them start with the same structure, often parroting cheesy sci-fi film titles, but there comes a point where the repetition of themes gets confusing. For example, the two episodes, The Day Time Stood Still and The Day That Flip Stood Still, are very easy to jumble up. They should have put more time into their naming conventions, so mix-ups aren't so common. Enough of the bickering though, let's freaking begin. While I consider the show's average quality to be decent, Season 1 was all over the place and played with some notable misses. Case in point, The Day That Wouldn't End. Probably the most repetitive episode of the whole show. As the title would suggest, a miserable case of Monday bad luck affecting Tommy keeps on repeating in an almost never-ending loop. You're gonna need to have some good jokes to justify doing this, or at the very least mix it up after a while. It does do a bit of the latter, but it's not executed well enough. Not to mention most of the jokes don't land in this one, and it gets annoying when they repeat with no differences for so long. Some of this is worsened by obnoxious sound design. Just saying, if you didn't find the joke funny the first time, you likely won't find it funny the second, or the third, or even when they do change something. Not really a concept that works best in 11 minutes anyway, so this isn't necessarily the show's fault. That said, this could have been handled a lot better. A world without hamburgers. After Dinko hears the ramblings of the recurring old man Bitters about how much he despises junk food, he quickly adopts that ideology and begs Tommy and the rest to eat healthier. This episode's okay for the most part, but Dinko does act rather dickish in this one, forcing his healthy-tarian lifestyle onto Tommy. Not sure if this is making fun of those parents who force diets onto their children, but he isn't likable in those moments. The apology at the end does heal some of the problem at least. One thing is to be praised though, Dinko invented the perfect nightmare food to curse non-healthitarians with. Box of Doom. A common naming convention of episodes of this show was to put of Doom at the end of something. Crater of Doom, Island of Doom, Doctor of Doom, Temple of Doom, Archvile of Doom. You get the idea. I actually own the DVD Lighter Side of Doom, which contains this episode along with 3 others. This is the opener to it, and it's easily the weakest of them all. The aliens find a jumpy box offshore, which they fear could be the titular Box of Doom. Whilst that's happening, Tommy is in search for another box full of Norwegian jumping beans to retrieve for Captain Spangly. There's also an element where Granville believes the box contains a gift for Melba, so he passes whatever's in it as his own. There were some decent jokes throughout, and the premise had plenty of potential, though it does drag on a little much for its own good. Much of the jokes that are there feel rather forced as well. The ending is kinda grim, but also a huge cop-out. Not bad necessarily, but this can easily be skipped. Big Hand of Fate. Tommy wakes up with a big hand the day of the baseball tryouts, and this has its share of pros and cons. His hand also turns normal again at inconvenient times. Honestly, besides being a boring episode and not utilizing the best element of Dr. Daffodil enough, this is one of the very few episodes where Tommy has actually annoyed me.
I got a big hand. I got a big hand. A big, jiggy, hand.
Ugh, I praised you for not being like the show you practically birthed, damn it. Wow, is this really what being almost 22 is like? Complaining about a stupid cartoon moment in a stupid manner? Hey, I've at least passed one part of the animation critic YouTuber test. On a side note, Dinko likes the large hand of his a little too much. It's kind of unsettling. The Boy with 6 Legs. Man, if you want to talk about a bad first impression, this sure fits the bill. This is the first ever episode that officially aired. After Tommy rushes to take the trash out after oversleeping, he puts on Swanky's robe and later gets locked out when in desperate need of shelter and decent clothes. During this, a crab enters his lighthouse and lands right on the answering machine, and much of the aliens mistake the crab as Tommy.
There is a slight resemblance.
Swanky fancies himself a feast despite this. The premise is admittedly one I'm not much of a fan of, but that's not really the main issue I have with this one. The execution's actually fine, though it is baffling that this is the episode they chose to air first. It also has the noticeable caveat of the animation quality being of a lower grade and more inconsistent than usual. Again, Dinko in particular looks especially fugly with those messed up teeth. That said, this episode isn't the worst of this variety. No, that actually goes to its sister episode, Evil Emperor. What's strange here is that as far as writing and humor goes, this does work far better and isn't much of a problem at all. Yet again, it's the unfinished nature of the animation and style that harmed my enjoyment. I know I complimented the visuals before, but but these weird prototypical episodes are a glowing exception. This one feels the least finished of all of them, with some shots missing the full backgrounds it seems. Look at this, the shadows fade in late for no apparent reason, like the shader wasn't loading. But easily the worst element has to be the evil Emperor breed itself. Give the model credit, it's terrifying, especially so in its demonic form with its jaundiced eyes. It's a shame that I kinda hated this one though, since there are a few funny moments present, and the alien's fear does feel genuine. There were a few other unpolished episodes which aired afterwards, like Crater of Doom, It Came from the Closet, and to a lesser extent Assault on a Rodent, but at least in those the visuals aren't as much of a problem, or they provide enough entertainment to look past. Mostly. There's a few other duds littered around, as you would probably expect, but I don't find them noteworthy enough to mention, some of which I probably haven't seen. Even then, much of the episodes I name dropped did have their share of redeeming qualities, and have clicked with me when I'm in the right headspace, still proving to me that even in its lowest points, there's some stuff to salvage. And to emphasize how good the show can get, let's even things out by talking about select episodes I most enjoyed, plus a few other notable highlights. I'll try not to spoil too much about them, though I'll obviously explain why I found them good. While I have said before that Season 2 was more consistent in its quality, there are still plenty of gems hidden in the first. My favorite of these has to be the episode, The Land That Size Forgot, a Gumper-centric episode where he tries to protect the snow globe, which he names Tinytopia, away from the no-good Shakers. Swanky is most interested in uncovering its secrets, but his plans are thwarted by everyone else. He of course gives it a good number of shakes. Even Dinko isn't immune to the urge to shake it, as he goes nuts with the thing.
Shaking is bad.
Because of that, Gumpers is upset at and disappointed in Dinko and no longer considers him a friend, leaving him distraught and full of regret. Fortunately for both of them, this grudge doesn't last long and they make amends. Honestly, one of the sweetest moments of the series, and emphasizes how well the aliens play off each other. They also managed to make a story involving a weirdo treating an object like a sentient being endearing, something many have struggled with by pushing it too far with barely any hint of comedy besides, isn't this strange? Laugh now. This show was a very victim of this issue with Granville's animal statues, so it's nice to see a great execution of this trope. The show's final episode, Hammy of Earth, handles pretty much the same concept fairly well also. I think they just work here because the characters and tone are weird enough to get away with such out there premises, an element that's missing from many other plots in this variety elsewhere. This ranks very high in my recommended episodes to hopefully get you into the show's vibe. Dinko's crying is annoying though. I didn't like that. As a heads up, you may not be surprised to find out that a lot of my favorite episodes are ones which don't focus as much on Tommy and the other non-aliens. If you're in for an episode that goes all out on the wacky factor, the boy who cried wah should scratch that itch. Originally this was one of the episodes I didn't like, but it would soon grow on me. Dinko's new hat invention designed to help Tommy expectedly leads to the opposite effect, in large part due to Dinko's selfish conviction in slowing down Tommy's aging process. As the title suggests, interference caused between the metal hat and age slower downer turns Tommy into a baby instead of the intended outcome. Aside from some predictable and cheap baby humor, along with Dinko's attitude starting off unpleasant, this episode offers an absurd but enjoyable display of antics. Can't rank it too high in my recommendations because of that, but if you don't enjoy this one, its sister episode The Cow Goes Moo is another frantic romp that should also provide a good couple laughs. Oh, how the oddities of Earth be woe to the uncultured aliens. You gotta love that. Master Bakers. This one is also almost entirely Gumpers. Swanky demands him to find his special purpose, which in this case means refraining from consuming the gingerbread people from the local bakery. Convinced that the cookies were made of real people, he tries his best to fulfill the task of protecting them. The premise is very close to The Land That Size Forgot, but both handle the concept in very different ways. In this case, his gluttonous appetite serves a large hindrance. Tommy has to oversee Gumpers just so he doesn't mess things up further. He does succeed in this endeavor, but there's a catch to all this. Best you watch the episode for yourself, and it should be noted that Dinko doesn't even appear until the end. Normally I complain, but Gumpers is a great character anyway, so I don't mind. Scare Affair. This is an episode that proves how much of a nuisance hiccups can be, especially right before a video game tournament. Once Tommy does lose them though, the aliens have the misfortune of being infected. It's admittedly very simple, much like a lot of the Season 1 episodes, but it flows very well and is enjoyable from start to finish. Dinko apparently also fears the hell out of cats, so much so there's another episode about that. Both are pretty cool, but I kinda prefer this one. There's even a dark nod to another animated alien icon here. Insert tasteless topical hashtag here. You know how I said that the show began sour, but would quickly improve the overall quality of episodes? One of my favorites is actually the very episode released after the first two. The Amazing Atomic Tommy. One of the DVDs was even named after it, and I'd say that was well deserved. Dinko believes Tommy is actually a grand superhero after he performed a magic trick taking a coin out of his nose, and when he sees that exact event described on a superhero show on TV. Swanky observes this, and has his own greedy interest by thinking Dinko is some sort of money cow. or alien, playing the role of a supervillain. It's one of the most absurd episodes of the show, even with the bar for absurdity set very high as is. Might not be as funny as some of the previous episodes I've discussed, and some could see it as missing potential, but the ridiculousness is its biggest strength. Now, if only the money nose trick was real so my bookers could become gold worth something. The guest who wouldn't leave. Ever. Say hello to the most out-of-place character design of the entire show. An Alpha Centaurian black hole warlord named Bob. Charlie Schlatter absolutely nails his delivery as the unmoving guest. That combined with his try-hard personality makes him one of the funniest one-offs in my opinion. And all this because Tommy wanted to win a game of Taffy Maw against the pompous Granville.
Destroy the Granville!
It's ridiculous and over the top, and the show knows it. I wish Bob good luck on becoming a decent black hole warlord. As insane as that sentence sounds. Day of the Naked Aliens. I think this one deserves at least a mention for the following reasons. 1. Godly episode title. 2. This line of dialogue.
It be meanin' that the hey diddle diddle 'tis in plain sight to the cat and the fiddle.
And 3. This is the only episode to have some notable censorship. When Cubo aired this show, this episode was omitted from their lineup and replaced by the episode Race with the Clinton. I suppose they were more okay with the kids knowing the allegations than Gumper singing his naked song. Though I admit, this is a very crude episode even for this show's standards. There's a surprising amount of dirty jokes here, ones that kids definitely wouldn't get. And this is coming from a show that makes a ton of not so subtle jokes about Uranus. Here it can get too on the nose with it, and maybe this had a good reason for being pulled. Like the pants, which they lack. Aside from a few uncomfortable segments, it's another funny display of ridiculousness and alien disconnect. The day the Earth blew up. Wait, you're telling me this isn't a Pet Alien episode? That can't be. What could this even be for? Oh! That's got a concerning chance of release. Fuck it, if it does get scrapped, I'll just call it a lost episode of this show. And finally, I should show off how much better the second season started compared to the first by talking about the episodes which kicked it off. The Creature Who Left, and It Came From the Fan Club. I think this is proof that the show had much greater potential than most gave it. The first half is a nice, kinda heartfelt story about Swanky leaving the lighthouse to hang out with the Royal Granville, being dubbed as his viceroy. It's probably the best utilizing of the buffoon of a leader, one where he isn't exclusively a butt monkey. If anything, Swanky learns a lot from this experience, and misses the very thing that drove him away from the other aliens, a sense of fun. It does the sincere story while still remaining funny, and that's something I admire about it. The Fan Club episode is also a great case study on the character's inner workings. In particular, it shows that Gabby and Dinko share a bond about their appreciation of Tommy, which seems very natural for both of them to do. Tommy himself and Gumpers also pretend to have their own fan club which they persuade the others to join, and to gain information about their secret. It sounds creepy at the start, but both sides end up in the same predicament of wanting to be part of their respective clubs. By comedic convenience, it works out, and the truth is revealed, uniting them all. Plenty of great gags to be found here, like the recurring joke about the lollipop plunger. Weird how they made a toilet joke actually frickin' work. Again, I do feel sad that this show is slept on with gems like this being around. Underneath all its flaws is a solid piece of fast-paced yet intellectually silly comedy. Before this review comes to a close, I should at least try to possibly explain why this show remains buried under deep obscurity. Even when the series was active, it couldn't have been seen by that many. According to some sources I've read, Cartoon Network didn't air the show at convenient times. At least in the United States, this show premiered late in the morning on a Sunday, and not on a primetime slot. More often than not, shows being scheduled at such obscure times leads to quick cancellation. It's much harder to keep consistent numbers, even if it does air on a weekend. I'm more confident that the show failed to reach a wide enough audience, however, because 2004 and early 2005 weren't a great time for screwball comedy cartoons. That style of show had grown quickly unfavorable after the 90s, and I don't think the 3D spin on the format could have helped. Of the notable debuts of the time, a majority of which were action and story-driven series that took themselves more seriously. Shit, 2005 was the very year that Looney Tunes, a pioneer of animated slapstick, got a gritty action series based off of it. 2005 was also a huge breakthrough year for anime in the West, with plenty of Western series following the trend. Avatar: The Last Airbender being the most prevalent artifact of that era's anime inspiration. That's not to say that comedies were totally dead during this time. There were plenty that did begin later that year, such as Camp Lazlo and Cat Scratch. SpongeBob and Family Guy would also make grand returns that very year. However, even a lot of the newer humor-focused shows would try to adapt to a more action-driven format. American Dragon Jake Long and even Johnny Test to a lesser extent come to mind. And that does not ignore how dominant DC superhero comedies were back then. Adding to this, much of the past era-defining comedies during Pet Alien's wake would either come to an abrupt end or would diminish in relevance soon after. The edgy Owls and had little room for lighthearted fun cartoons like that one, besides some rare exceptions. Maybe if the show began a year later when comedies were slowly heading back into style, it would have had a better chance. However, I think the main culprit for this show's failure in America was down to the show's title. Let's be overtly honest here for a second, and admit that Pet Alien is an awfully generic series name. Admittedly, a lot of series names suffer from that, but that's not the end of the problem with this one. If you didn't know anything about the show beforehand, what would you assume it'd be like having only heard the name? If you said anything other than a pet shop that sells many varieties of aliens, or a concept where someone befriends an alien companion that functions as a pet, you are not the basic masses. Most viewers wouldn't expect a character-focused frantic science fiction comedy to have such a title. It's a name that's both vague as hell, but also specific about one thing. And as I've mentioned before, only one alien can even be classified as a pet, and that's just loosely. People could have easily been misled that this show was like the ideas I described, likely also something aimed at preschoolers. Considering that this show aired less than a year before CN launched their own short-lived preschool block, you know, the one that wasn't Cartoonito, it's an easy incorrect guess to make in hindsight. There's also the topic of international localization, and I think that might be a vital part of why the show gained a better following elsewhere. Words can carry different meanings depending on the geography and culture, and very often show titles are changed for different markets. This cartoon is probably more known by its French name, Alien Bazaar, than it is to its original one. That name can possibly translate to something like Alien Chaos, which is a much more indicative title for what the show is actually about. It's got aliens, it's chaotic, it's very self-explanatory. And for as much as I do praise it, I definitely can see why the show's been brushed aside and forgotten for other reasons. There were better and more consistent comedies airing at this time, and the dated animation is the most troubling element of it all. Couple that with a shaky start and poor scheduling, it was set up to fail in America. Given all the show has a European animation vibe, it's no surprise that the show gained better success there. It didn't have the crossover appeal other multinational productions like the studio's own Code Lyoko had. It's a miracle that the show managed 2 seasons and 104 distinct episodes despite that, making it around the same length as many other short-lived series that deserved better. To put this into perspective, Rocko's Modern Life's runtime is almost identical to Pet Aliens, and I think that both should have lasted longer. Granted, I feel like this show only needed just one more season to really shine. I'm not asking for a revival, not that I think one would be possible these days, but it would be cool to see the world be expanded. Preferably have it be something in the spirit of Kailu and Looney Tunes cartoons for a more modern yet charmingly traditional slapstick flavor, rather than an edgelord's hacky fanfic that tries way too hard to be serious. There's definitely room for some serious themes, but it should remain a series that doesn't demand much critical thought. The show is far from perfect, but I've described it before as a beautiful train wreck with no shortage of redeeming qualities. At the very least, I would love to see it gain a decent enough cult following. With the similar cartoon Space Goose gaining a surge in popularity recently after being obscure for so long, I can also see this show getting that treatment if audiences are kind to it. Uglier shows have been able to gain cult status after all, so there is a chance. It helps that the show is kinda timeless in a way, unlike many cartoons of the mid-2000s. Lastly, I should probably try my best to explain why I grew attached to the adorable green guy Dinko in particular. Can you even believe it's been a running gag of mine for 4 straight years? I can't. Quite honestly, I don't even think I have a good reason to love him this much. Some may see him as a pest to the one he considers his closest friend, and sometimes I feel that way too. Others may say that his design is almost a direct imitation of Yoshi's, so he might not be that visually distinct. I'll even say that he's not even the best written character on the show. That'd probably be Swanky. Even still, I've considered him to be a comfort character for a long while. His varied and upbeat personality make him seem very welcoming and interesting. He might not exactly make the best friend given his conflicting attitude and misbehavior, but even in his worst moments, I can't bring myself to dislike him. His charismatic energy is just way too strong. Then again, I have said in the past that my greatest weakness in loving characters is when they're green, lizard-like, and have strong friendly energy. Dinko almost perfectly fits the textbook definition of exactly that. No wonder I adore him. I will not tolerate any slander towards the poor alien. He's already got bad enough luck. While I do understand why some may have trouble liking him as a character, I don't care. He's just cool. And I think that should wrap up this lengthy video about one of my biggest obsessions. I can't deny that the show is an acquired taste, and that it's not exactly an essential cartoon even for CGI animated TV. I wasn't even thinking that the show would have held up given its age and how long it's been since I last saw it. However, I still consider many parts of it to be underappreciated and arguably important to the development of exaggerated 3D animation. There's a distinct charm to it that resonated with me, both as a kid and even more so now. Some may consider me too nice to such a series, and I'm not denying I may have a slight bias. Still, there's enough good in my eyes to look past its few shortcomings. If I really had to give the show a general rating,
I'm gonna have to give this one a 7.
And if I'm really generous, it comes close to being an 8. I'd suggest giving the show a shot for yourself to see how you think it holds up, preferably starting with the episodes that I recommended rather than at the beginning. I would love to hear any thoughts you may have on this forgotten cartoon, so please do leave comments below. You know, assuming this video stays safe from any copyright or for kids only shenanigans. Chances are I'll do more of these types of reviews in the future, especially if I find any other media which greatly interests me. This was a very fun passion project to work on, and a breath of fresh air to express my admiration for something after a trend of gloomy and bitter rants. This will obviously not mark the end of me referencing this guilty pleasure show of mine. In fact, I really want to talk about extra pit alien media sometime soon. For a relatively forgotten series, there's still tons of interesting material beyond what I've discussed. Some things I intentionally left out of this review for that very reason, as I plan to get to those later. Anyways, I really hope that you enjoyed this review, and that my slight fanaticism wasn't a turn-off in any way. I shall see you all again next time, probably in a grumpier mood once again to everyone's dismay. Just remember, stand Dinko and sniff Welches.